this is Face the Nation. I'm Sonali Vanipatake. We're coming to you live and direct from Stein Studios here in Ratmalana. Now, for decades, Sri Lanka has been known to be a transshipment hub for illegal drugs, narcotic substances that make its way into the country, some of which then makes its way out into neighboring countries. For decades, drug abuse has been a cause for concern in Sri Lanka, with a notable number of young persons and adults addicted, cornered by society, unable to contribute to the GDP, the country's development, overwrought with mental trauma. The list goes on. Now, we've all talked about the traditional street drugs, the heroin and the cannabis. Now, this evening's discussion will also focus on the synthetic drugs which have made its way into the Sri Lankan market. Ecstasy, crystal meth, ice, LSDs, cocaine, which are more commonly known as party drugs and are known to be a regular feature in most of Colombo's nightlife. We will also be discussing the laws governing this area, the rehabilitation mechanisms available, and the manner in which we as a country can effectively combat this scourge, this cancer that is drugs. So we invite you to be a part of this discussion. We have invited an eminent panel of guests this evening to join us in this debate and discussion. We are pleased to invite DIG Ajit Rohana from the Sri Lanka Police. He is also an attorney at law. Good evening and welcome to you.
Good evening.
We are also joined by DIG Sajeeva Madhawatta from the Police Narcotics Bureau, joining us for the first time on our show. Good evening and welcome to you.
Good evening.
We are also joined by Dr. Upali Piris. He is the head of the Department of Psychiatry at the Faculty of Medicine from the University of Kelaniya and a consultant psychiatrist. Thank you, Doctor, for being on our show this evening. Our fourth guest is Professor Saman Abesinghe, the chairman of the National Dangerous Drugs Control Board, who also joins us. Thank you for joining us tonight. Finally, we are joined by Shanaka Jayasekara. He's the program coordinator at UNODC for South Asia. Good evening and welcome to you.
Thank you.
So my first question is to Professor Saman Abesinghe, chairman of the National Dangerous Drugs Control Board. Professor Abesinghe, you are heading the body which is supposed to mainly control this menace that is drugs. What are the major challenges that you are faced with at this present juncture?
So actually, I have to express our gratitudes and thanks to the series to organize this kind of timely important aspects to this country. Well, if I come to your question, so we are actually facing several issues and several challenges in this scenario. Actually, the National Dangerous Drugs Control Board was established under 1984 Act.
Sure.
So now it is 35 years old to the institute, and also with our act also now 35 years old. Now we have a new phase to this scenario. So the first challenge that what we have to amend certain section of the act in par with the new situation. And also we have now high number of incidents of drugs abuses in this country, and we are now confronted with some issues and challenges regarding the rehabilitation, because we have limited resources at the moment, so we have to expand to cater the present situation. And also there is another challenge, that the detection. So these are all chemicals, so we have to have some kind of reliable methods to detect and identify these chemicals instantly. So that is to support for our law enforcement authority and also other authority that they are working with these drugs. So those are the main three challenges that we have at the moment.
Professor, could you also talk to us about some of the proactive measures that the National Dangerous Drugs Control Board has taken to ensure that there is a reduction in this drug menace?
Well, first of all, I mean, as I mentioned that we have to have a proper mechanism to identify these people in society. So in the society we are taking some kind of information that is mainly because of some arrestments, and the people very limited, they are coming voluntarily to us. So getting information is the major thing.
Right. Professor, can you take us through what measures have been put in place at the moment to combat the drug menace?
There is also, as I mentioned, we have to amend some
sure.
the act, but we have with the provisions.
But take us through the rehabilitation centers. Is there a hotline? What about the other support mechanisms that victims or drug abuse survivors can have?
So we have a hotline that is 1984. Actually that hotline is open for everybody, so that is a direct line. The thing is, now we are under discussion to improve that further, to get it to 119 channel. So we are planning to improve that for the 24-hour service and for 3 languages. So that is underway. But still that line can be used to give any kind of information and also get any support from the institute through that line. On top of that, we have recently introduced a Facebook page as well to the public that they can share with their knowledge and the information what we have in our institute.
Right. Thank you very much for your opening remarks, Professor Saman Abhay Singha. I move my attention now to Dr. Upali Pires, consultant psychiatrist, head of Department of Psychiatry at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Kelaniya. Doctor, in your treatment of persons who are addicted to drugs, what are some of the commonalities you see across the board?
Sonali, the spectrum of patients that we do treat in a tertiary care setting where I'm a clinician mainly focuses on to the people who come with substance misuse plus a mental disorder. The irony of that is the people who do not have any mental illness or psychological disorder and purely having a substance misuse, or for example opiate dependence or heroin addiction, they are not being treated and not being offered inpatient care in our system, current health system. Previously, yes. Previously, when I was a medical officer, district medical officer at District Hospital Unawatuna, we did treat patients with opiate dependence or heroin addiction, and subsequently the policies have changed so that people with pure addiction without any psychological abnormality are not being treated in state hospitals. Therefore, the spectrum that we see in the public tertiary care setting, which teaching hospital where I do work, have a limited presentations of people who have addiction. Of course, the people who have alcohol use and been freely treated like before, and so we do treat. The commonality is that the question you ask is in addiction, it spans for regardless of the substance. The crucial point is that they have a compulsion or repetitive taking of substance despite they are having a a negative outcome or having a negative impact on their day-to-day living or affecting their discharging responsibilities. Be it alcohol, be it nicotine or heroin, that is a commonality that would describe.
Right.
I think that would probably answer your question.
Doctor, can you also take us through the extent of the support mechanism available in Sri Lanka, either through the state or other stakeholders? How inadequate is our support mechanism for drug addicts?
Sonali, the question is very important, because as a clinician I get disappointed when I do come across people with heroin addiction, ask help for them to overcome the situation. The trend I have seen in my practice, there is a surge of seeking help, of such help from the people who have opioid dependence when there is running short of supply, for example, in the country, and they don't have the supply, so they go into a thing called the withdrawal symptom, commonly known as sickness, sick-kicker, that's what they call it. And then of course then they come here to negotiate that period medically, right? And the support that the question is, the support that that they are having is horrendous. It's a family who has to bear the burden, not the, it's unfortunately sad to say the state. Professor Abhay Singh and his team is trying to develop that, I'm pretty sure, but we have a long way to go, because the support which is offered and the services are not in demand, does not match the demand of this.
Right, thank you very much, Doctor, for your thoughts. My next question is to DIG Sajiva Madhavatta from the Police Narcotics Bureau. DIG Madhavatta, take us through the role of the Police Narcotics Bureau in drug-related offences. What exactly is it that you do?
Yeah, good evening. Actually, thank you very much for giving this opportunity to Sri Lanka Police and the Police Narcotics Bureau. As we well aware, there are so many drug enforcement agencies in action in Sri Lanka, but Sri Lanka Police Narcotics Bureau is the major narcotic agency. Actually, our main target, our main concept beyond on 5 major categories. Number 1, prevention, that's in proactive policing methods. Number 2, detections. So we are doing all the detection in the country, not only the Police Narcotic Bureau, as well as all the police stations in Sri Lanka, and division wide squad and division level also they are operating. But we are monitoring all the systems, prevention, detection and the prosecution. We are doing the prosecution for all narcotic cases, and investigation and the rehabilitation. That is our major task. Sri Lanka Police Narcotic Bureau, the head office is situated in police headquarters, and there are 6 sub-units all over the country, like Arugambe, Kandy, Mena, Puntland and few areas to come back to face this issue. Other thing is, this is the biggest social issue in Sri Lanka now. As you know, there are so many cases in high courts and magistrate courts pending. More than 560 cases are pending in high courts for narcotic crimes, and nearly 400 cases in magistrate courts for preliminary investigation. The number of cases are very high. Last 10 years, we detected so many kind of like heroin, then cocaine, cannabis and synthetic drugs in so many instances. Actually, most of the time we are getting heroin from 6 areas of the world. If you can, I can show you the country. Generally, we are getting cocaine, heroin from Golden Crescent, the countries are Afghanistan, Iran and Pakistan. And the Golden Triangle, Myanmar, Laos and Thailand. We are getting heroin from those countries, and the cocaine, most of the time we are getting cocaine from Brazil. Other drugs, especially our biggest issue is now, especially these days, the synthetic drugs. As Professor mentioned, this is the biggest issue. We are also fighting against the synthetic drugs also. That is the main part of the game.
Right, thank you very much, DIG Madhavatta. I move my attention now to DIG Ajit Rohana from the Sri Lanka Police, who is also an attorney at law. DIG Rohana, I'd like to focus your attention to the various pieces of legislation that govern the regulation, control of drugs in Sri Lanka. We have the main act, the Poisons, Opium and Dangerous Drugs Ordinance of 1935 as amended, which is the principal statutory enactment. However, subsequently there are other pieces of legislation as well. Could you take us through the main laws that govern this area?
Yes, thank you, Sonali, and once again I'm thankful to TV1 for giving this opportunity to Sri Lanka Police to express views in respect of drug menace in Sri Lanka. Actually, if we think of drugs, the human being has been consumed drugs since the since the inception of the human civilization. Some fossilized poppy seeds had been discovered in the area where the Neanderthal man lived in Switzerland 30 years ago, 30,000 years ago. It means, so human being has been consuming, using drugs, I think, so these are the evidence, but before that also, before the civilization also, human being has used drugs. So however, in Sri Lanka, if we think of the rules and regulation, initially at the very outset in 1675, 343 years ago, the Dutch rulers, they had introduced a proclamation on prevention of drugs. So that is the first regulation or the enactment that had been introduced by the Dutch rulers. However, the British rulers, once they invaded the whole country on the 2nd of March 1815, sometimes they created a system to get income from drugs, especially opium. However, the British rulers also realized that the drug was becoming a very big problem. So therefore, in 1929, the first enactment in respect of drugs they introduced, that is called Poisons, Opium and Dangerous Drugs Ordinance. And Sonali, so it was introduced in 1929, and after 55 years time, in 1984, an important amendment was brought to the principal enactment. As you all know, there are 6 offences in the penal code. Those offences could impose death penalty in respect of a person who has committed that offence. And in the first time in our legal history, apart from the offences that are embodied in the penal code, this 1984 amendment introduced death penalty in respect of drug offences. So if a person is having or in the possession 500 grams of opium or above, or 3 grams of cocaine or 2 grams of heroin, so that offender is liable for death penalty, the capital punishment. In addition to that, this problem had been identified by the government in 1984, because the first heroin user was detected in Sri Lanka in 1981 in Hikkaduwa, but according to our statistics or the information, first time a sample of heroin was brought to Sri Lanka in 1979. So, in 1984, apart from the amendment brought to the principal enactment, another important act was introduced. So, that is called Dangerous Drugs Controlling Board, National Dangerous Drug Controlling Board Act, where the Professor Abhay Singh is heading at the moment. And in addition to that, in 2005, especially these drug offences are related to all other offences. It's a transnational crime. So, therefore, in 2005, our legislature introduced a special act called Convention on the Suppression of Terrorist Financing. It is directly connected to drug offences. And in year 2006, another 3 enactment was introduced by our legislature. So, the important one is Prevention of Money Laundering Act. So, all these matters related to drugs are connected to money laundering. And in addition to that, Financial Transaction Reporting Act, it was introduced in 2006, and another act, it is not directly connected to drugs, but the National Authority on Tobacco and Alcohol. So, NATA Act is also indirectly connected to this. And another 2 enactments, important enactment was introduced subsequently in 2007. It is called Drug Dependent Persons Treatment and Rehabilitation. So, this is very, very important, and I would like to discuss the facts of this particular enactment later. And in addition to that, Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substance. So, these are the enactments that had been introduced by our legislature. So, let us discuss later.
Thank you, DIG Rohana, for that comprehensive update on the laws and regulations governing drugs in Sri Lanka. Finally, I move my attention to Shanaka Jayasekara, Program Coordinator, UNODC for South Asia. Shanaka, much of your role is focused on supporting the government with regard to developing regional initiatives, because this drug menace is not only a local problem but a regional problem and can't be looked at in isolation. Talk to us a bit about the work in specific.
Thank you, Sonali. Yes, what United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime does is to support member states develop strategies and policies and strengthen their enforcement capability to counter narcotics trafficking. When you look at drug trafficking, it cannot be taken in isolation. It's not only a domestic issue, and this is not only related to Sri Lanka, but to any country in the region. It's multifaceted in terms of a domestic issue as well as it's interconnected to a regional issue. So your policies need to be fashioned to address these 2 paradigms in some sense. Looking at the domestic issue, you need to have both your enforcement capability to reduce your supply side, and that's what DIG Madhawatta is doing through the PNB. Sure. And you also have to have the demand reduction side, and that's what NDDCB is doing. So that's the domestic dimension. But what is also important to understand is that this is all interconnected to a regional phenomenon in terms of drug trafficking out of Afghanistan. So Sri Lanka, the predominant drug used in Sri Lanka, as it was indicated, is heroin. And the source of supply coming to Sri Lanka comes from Afghanistan, primarily from Afghanistan. And if you look at the supply routes, there are 3 different routes that heroin takes out of Afghanistan.
Right.
2 of which are not necessarily linked to Sri Lanka. One is called the northern route, which goes through Uzbekistan and into the Russian Federation and into Europe. The second route is called the Balkan route, which goes from Iran into Turkey and into the Balkans and into Europe. But what is important for countries like Sri Lanka, which is in the Indian Ocean, is the southern route. The southern route is where the heroin that has been produced in Afghanistan comes down to the coast, the Makran coast, and comes to the East African coast, the Swahili coast, either to drop-off points in Mombasa or Zanzibar, or further down in the Mozambique Channel, or to South Asia, to Sri Lanka or the Maldives, and then it's transited to Europe. Now, these are transit locations, and what is important to understand between the regional dimension and the domestic dimension is that transit locations over a period of time can become consumer locations. And that is why it is important to address this issue both at a domestic level and also at a regional level. And that's what the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime is working with the government of Sri Lanka in addressing this issue at the regional level.
Thank you very much, Shanaka Jayasekara. I open the floor for questions from Charita Fernando and Nadeem Majid. Let's start off with Charita.
Thank you, Sonali. My first question is to DIG Rohana.
Yes.
We've seen an increased number of detection and arrests of people trafficking narcotics in recent times. Is it because there's an increase in supply, or has the police stepped up their anti-narcotic operations, or is the media reporting these incidents much more now than before?
DIG Madhavatha.
Okay, DIG Madhavatha, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, last 3-4 years, when we see the detections made by the Sri Lanka police, customs, and the other law enforcement agencies, especially last 2 years, detections are very high. Especially heroin, we have detected more than 1,000 kilos during last 10 years. I have the figures. You can see, I can see the detections. You know, it's only heroin. From 2009 to 2018, we made biggest detection in year 2013, 350 kilos of cocaine, heroin, and this year up to now 175 kilos, 2018. This is the arrest made by the Sri Lanka police. Number of persons, you can see how it increased. Now here, this is just first 7 months in 2018. That's for heroin. But there's a significant difference between heroin detection and the cocaine detection. In 2016, PMB and customs, we had detected 1,570 kilos of cocaine. But this year, last year, 2017, only 220 kilos, and this year, only 14 kilos. We made the biggest detection in Sri Lanka history in 2016, that is 938 kilos of cocaine.
DIG Madhavatha, what does this statistics tell you? What can you fathom out of the numbers? Is there an increase in supplies that are coming in, or
actually
how can you analyze the data?
Yeah. Actually, last 2-3 years, with our great effort, I think number of detections are increasing. That is the main issue. But for the synthetic drugs, I think we can see a quite increase of the synthetic drugs. Other cocaine, cannabis, and heroin. There is a significant decrease. You can see that.
Mr. Jayasekara, I would like to know your take on the statistics. Now, we know that there is an increase in production of heroin coming from Afghanistan, right? So could could there be an increased supply coming towards Sri Lanka? Because we now know that there is a route called the southern route, trafficking these to either Sri Lanka or the Maldives. Could there be an increase in supplies coming in?
Yes, I mean, definitely that is a trend that we see, because some of the other trafficking routes are having some inherent problems. As I said, the northern route is having issues in terms of a trade embargo between the Russian Federation and the European Union, and there is more checks being undertaken at crossing points. And because some of the conflicts that are taking place on the Balkan route, there are countries which are on different sides of the conflict, and which go through Iran and Turkey and into the Balkans. So what you're seeing is a ballooning effect on the maritime route, which is the southern route, and definitely the volumes that you're seeing are in excess of the requirement for the consumer market in Sri Lanka. So what you're seeing is the transit nature of Sri Lanka being highlighted. It's definitely encouraging to see that the PNB is doing a fantastic job in terms of higher degree of a higher number of detections. But it also highlights the fact that Sri Lanka is emerging more and more as a transit hub, and it is important to arrest that issue, and that can only be done through a more regional approach of information sharing and intelligence coordination.
So when you say Sri Lanka is becoming a transit hub, how does that happen? Now assume these supplies come in, do they use our ports, or how does this happen? What is the information available at the moment?
As I indicated at a lecture that I gave at BCIS, the level of information we have in terms of the South Asian market is limited. However, a significant amount of the large volumes, so the 400 kilos or the 200 kilo volumes, are coming by sea, are being dropped off through dhow traffic. Dhows are Arabian vessels that come across the Indian Ocean and drop off to smaller vessels that bring it ashore. The onward routes are something that we also are unsure about as to how it gets out of the country. It could be containerized. It could go out through other forms. So when you're looking at the large volumes of heroin in particular coming into the country, it's coming in by sea.
And what would the impact be on Colombo port if in case it's being transshipped via containers?
Well, it would be quite serious if it is, and again we don't have the evidence to indicate that that is the form of trafficking. But if it is, then the risk rating for Colombo port as a heroin transshipment point could increase. But again, we don't have that level of information. So what is important to try and figure out with all these detections is, why are there such large volumes coming into Sri Lanka when it is in excess of the consumer requirement, and how is it going out of Sri Lanka? And that is where the most important information that is required is, how is it going out of Sri Lanka, and what networks are operating from the Afghan side to Sri Lanka and into Europe. What are the networks that are operating, providing the facilities or facilitating this trafficking pattern?
Professor Abesingha, does the National Dangerous Drugs Control Board conduct any kind of studies or research to identify what Mr. Jayasekara was talking about, to identify why there is such a high volume coming in that is in excess of the demand in the country, and why, where it's going or where it's intended to go to before it's gone? Does the Dangerous Drugs Control Board do that kind of research? What exactly is the role of the NDDC?
So actually at the moment, so we are focusing within the country. So what comes to the country and how they are trafficking within the country. So this is on top of that is the international link. So recently, I mean, we are working on the set up SAREC office under DDCB So that will give us correct data and intelligence sharing. So we are in the final stage of that, the setup to the office under the NDCB. So the main objective of the setting up that office is to address this question. So once we set up that, we hope that we will get more and more information regarding the international trafficking.
DIG Madhavatha, when in the investigations that are conducted by the Narcotics Bureau, have you been able to identify who the players are in this drug racket? Who's bringing it in? Who's the broker in the transshipment? Have you managed to identify individuals like that, and has criminal action been filed against these people?
Yes, there are few investigations going on to identify the international drug traffickers. During I want to mention one thing. I want to clarify one thing. As Mr. Shanaka said, for cannabis and heroin, we can't say Sri Lanka, the Colombo port used as a hub, but they are used in Sri Lanka, Colombo port for cocaine transport, especially for cocaine. Even when we talk about the highest detection, the last destination was Mundra, the harbor of, it's a port of India. The previous one 214 kilos, the last was Seychelles, like that. That was on the way we managed to detect the stuff, but all cocaine stuff to the container. Last 10 years, we have arrested 326 foreigners for these incidents. Other thing is, as I mentioned in my earlier, Afghanistan, they are growing the biggest poppy. In Afghanistan, the poppy cultivation was increased by 42% during last 3 years. Right? Especially the southern route they are used in Sri Lanka. Actually, it's very difficult. It's a transnational crime. It's very difficult to trace entire the system. But thing is, inquiries are going on. For the moment, we have arrested 326 foreigners for this.
Are you collaborating with international agencies like Interpol and in India and with the authorities in Afghanistan as well?
Yeah, actually we have direct contact with the Interpol, then DEA, especially UNODC, and the SDOMD. SDOMD is SARC Drug Offences Monitoring Desk. We are dealing with all Asian countries. The office is in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, in police headquarters. We are sharing information, and we are getting information from them, and if we receive some information, we are passing it to the relevant authorities. We have that connection.
DIG Rohana, just one second. DIG Rohana, DIG Madhavatha mentioned that they have arrested over 300 foreign nationals for bringing drugs. You mentioned earlier that there is a threshold for a certain amount. Then, if you are caught in possession of a certain amount of, I think, heroin or cocaine or serious drugs like that, then you are liable for the death penalty in Sri Lanka. What is the law concerning marijuana? Because I think even recently we saw a story in the news about a stash of marijuana being hidden on one of the islands, on one of the islets off the coast. What is the law concerning marijuana in Sri Lanka right now?
So especially that particular schedule mention about 3 types of drugs. Opium, I mean marijuana is also a part of opium. Opium. Then if a person is having a possession of 500 grams or above, so
cannabis, marijuana cannabis.
Yes, definitely a death penalty could be imposed, but so for other offences, I mean other drugs, actually life imprisonment, and apart from that 20-year rigorous imprisonment, that type of punishment could be imposed. Especially apart from the principal enactment that was introduced by the British rulers in 19 29, the Poisons, the Opium and Dangerous Drugs Ordinance. In 2008, as I earlier mentioned, a special act was introduced. So it is called Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances. So according to this act, this is very powerful, because so every time in this particular act there are no fines. So the minimum punishment is 10 years rigorous imprisonment. So therefore this act is the now we have some lacuna in the law, but I mean according to the existing laws, so we have powerful enactments, two enactments, the principal enactment and the act that was introduced in 2008.
Dearji Rohana, when talking about the different laws that we have, now when you take cannabis for example, it has different classes. Now if I'm not mistaken, I think the Ayurveda Act allows for Ayurvedic doctors to have a certain amount of cannabis in their possession, especially with regard to cannabis, because that's probably one of the drugs that's most widely open to abuse. Do you see any shortcomings in the law? Is there a need to strengthen it, or maybe even a need to relax it?
No, actually, according to my view, we need some amendments in respect of searching powers and detention of suspects for certain offences. But the existing laws are, I mean, fairly okay in order to deal with this existing situation.
Dr. Pires, is there any statistic that we can refer to when it comes to looking at how many, let's say you have a certain number of drug abusers who seek help, either therapy or psychosocial help or counseling? Are there statistics that we have, up-to-date statistics to show what kind of drugs they're using?
Yeah, I think with regard to statistics, I think Professor Abhijit should be a good resource person to talk about. I think what types of drugs being abused and are coming to clinicians' point of view in Sri Lanka is mainly it's the abuse of cannabinoids or cannabis in illicit drugs. And also we are forgetting the fact that nicotine and alcohol, they are drugs. And I would say the nicotine is the most common, cigarette smoking, and the impact on the health is enormous on that. But it's legalized. You can buy cigarettes, but the trend now is becoming the sales are getting lesser. But having said that, the newer synthetic drugs are also gradually getting popularized, right? Especially in urban areas, and as you mentioned, it's getting more what do you call an advertising, or getting advertised automatically, right? And then the youth tend to experiment on that. One other different perspective, you asked the question what it means when this the detections are more and more. The question, I was thinking a different perspective on that. Actually, it is possible still, even in the past, such influx has been there to the country, but not being detected. Now it could be, that's what I am just postulating, whether the intelligence is become more, or now the networking and the IT has developed so much, and the police force have probably used different mechanisms, the scanners or whatever, because otherwise it would not have been picked up. So the problem must have been there in the past, now they are detecting it, right? So it could be that the improvement of the connection between the networking about the countries in the region. But that's nothing to do with the clinical aspect, but I've just thought of that.
Dr. Pires, what is the state of rehabilitation facilities in the country that are operated by the state?
Again, it's probably someone who might answer that question rather than me. But I'm a clinician who visits one of the local rehabilitation center in my area. That I have seen, it's about youth, generally about somewhere around 150 youths any given time being treated for heroin addiction. In Sri Lanka, there are certain NDDCB approved private sector enterprise, plus the state-owned rehabilitation centers. I'm sure Professor Abhising will be a resource person to talk about it.
Professor Abhising, do all rehabilitation centers that are run by the state, are they under the purview of the NDDCB?
Yeah, actually when it comes to the rehabilitation, so it is a main issue. So according to our statistics, so we assume that around 30-40,000 now we are within our society to be rehabilitated. So, but at the moment our strength is per year around 2,000. So that includes our 4 centers, and then we have private centers that is enacted with the 2007 law. But all these rehabilitation centers are under review with under NDDCB. So we are giving license and we are renewing their license, and we are screening.
So the private sector rehabilitation centers are also monitored and supervised by the NDDCB.
Yes, supervised by the NDDPC.
So you carry out regular, like periodic checks to make sure that they are.
Yes, of course,
doing right.
Because they have to apply for their license. So then we go through the standards, and we have set up standards, and then we do the site visits, and then we check their facilities, and when we satisfy, we give for a license for 1 year, and then each year they have to renew that. So at any time we can suspend that. So actually the government sector cannot handle this amount, so that is why we need to expand this very soon, and we are working on that.
You mentioned that your assessment was that there are about 30-40,000 people in our country right now who are in need of rehabilitation services, but that right now the capacity is that you can only handle about 2,000. Do you feel that there's a lack of funding that's coming, because there's a budget that's coming up this year? Do you have plans to apply for more funding from the Treasury?
Yes, of course. Now the fund is not the problem, so we have to make the setup and the infrastructure and coordination, because prisoners also have some kind of infrastructure, and they are also doing this same work. But the difference between the prison and what the NDDCB is, the people who voluntarily come for the rehabilitation, so we are taking up, apart from the people who are sending through the courts.
Right.
So
thank you very much, Professor. With that, we go in for a short commercial break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to the show. We're discussing the complexities surrounding drug abuse in Sri Lanka. My first question in this round is to Dr. Upali Pires, who is a consultant psychiatrist. Dr. Pires, when talking about drug addicts, we often find that there are persons who have been shunned by society, and you also get that vulnerability aspect when it comes to drug abuse, where people are cornered and stigmatized, and victims don't have a proper mechanism to seek assistance, and sometimes we find that there is no state sponsored support as well. So my question to you is, when it comes to substance misuse and addiction, is there a process where there's acute treatment facilities in Sri Lanka in the current context?
Sonali, actually it's a very, as I told in my first round, it's something quite disheartening to say that we don't have proper acute treatment facilities catering to the demand at the state sector.
Right.
Unless they have additional psychological symptoms such as depression or an episode of attempted suicide. Right. People who get referred with deliberate self-harm, take an overdose or attempted suicide, when we question them, it is found that they have additional substance misuse. Such people are being treated in our units. But other than that, the acute detoxification per se is not being catered on the state sector.
So do you think that, in your opinion, are the policy makers unaware of this acute need, or don't they care about this? Are there no budgetary allocations? I mean, if you could pinpoint where the exact problem lies, what would your opinion be? Well,
you mentioned about in the introduction about what the personality of a person who is an addict. Yeah, they are being. It's different from the rest of the crowd who have a psychological disorder, right? Main centers in the past, at least in the 80s, they were the state sector that we were providing them with acute detoxification. Later, we experienced that enormous problems of managing them in a common open unit.
Right.
Because by nature of addiction, they would engage upon smuggling the stuff into the units, and they tend to steal things because that's their to provide their supply. Therefore, they tend also to bring to build up a clan or a clique inside the units, and they're making a very administrative issue. Therefore, in all units in Sri Lanka, including the National Institute of Mental Health, now they do not offer the facility. That was the main reason. But as you said, we have to have of such centers for those who really in need of acute detoxification center. So now, can I your question is valid, but nevertheless I want to give public another important message of drug addiction. That is a prevention. Now, drug addiction does not come all of a sudden. It builds up from childhood and subsequently into adult and later on. As parents are very important, or the guardians, to pick up the early behaviors or symptoms or the characters of to be a drug addict. Now, it's very unlikely somebody who do not smoke will become a drug addict later on in their life. So when a youngster starts smoking, that's the time that they have to get alarmed, or to take sturdy action, or to get in them either a warning or take action in order to get out from nicotine, right? And the second stepping stone is cannabis. And then by 16, 17, they used to abuse Madana Modaka, which is available in the schools, perimetry, or any shops around. Right. Now, recently, I when I was treating young people, I asked what drugs that you abuse. Do you abuse illicit drugs? No, I don't abuse illicit drugs. Like heroin. No. So there is no issue. Then do you take cannabis? Yes, I do take cannabis. So the attitudes to the illicit drugs for cannabis is different. We have realized that. So, I mean, there are certain countries who have legalized cannabis, yes. But as clinician, I would say the cannabis is a big health problem. Now,
Right.
I don't know whether I have time to discuss that over here, but basically the parents have to identify people who abuse cannabis children. When they come, especially their appearance of their face become different. They are either kind of dazed with red conjunctiva, or the white part of the eye become red, and they lose their interest in the school, and they come late at home, especially the teenagers or late teens, and they are stealing money from. If you find that losing money from your home and your jewelry, for example, and then it's a time to take action and search their cupboards or whatever, and then find out, and to contact the either local hospital and to get some action into that. That's this question you did not ask, but I think that's more pertinent because of we was just celebrated recently the drug addiction week. Yes, prevention week.
My next question is to DIG Sajeeva Medavatta from the Police Narcotics Bureau. DIG, you mentioned that your role also encompasses prevention, detection, prosecution, investigation, among others. Can you take us through the process in which the Police Narcotic Bureau, nabs suspects who bring in these synthetic drugs? Because something that we commonly hear of is the manner in which much of Colombo's nightlife, nightclubs are sort of ubiquitous with these synthetic drugs. How do you adopt a different approach to synthetic drugs when it comes as opposed to the normal street drugs that we spoke of?
Yes, actually, the other drugs, cannabis, heroin and cocaine, they are using the different system for their day-to-day activities and operations. But in this issue, this is the biggest current issue, the synthetic drugs. There are so many synthetic drugs in Sri Lanka market, maybe in gel form, maybe in tablet form, maybe in powder form, or stamps and all things. The main issue is they are using easy cash system, easy cash. They are funding money through easy cash, and anyone can order this type. Those are most of them are painkillers. They can order it through the internet. Then social media, easy cash, and the you can call darknet. Most of them are using this. It's big issue. Other thing is there are three. The traffickers can bring drugs to Sri Lanka in three ways. Number one, from the airport. Number two, from the harbour. Number three, through the illegal sea routes. Last 2 years, they have detected, I think, nearly 5-6 kilos of synthetic drugs, tablets and all things. Some came from sea routes, some are from airport, and some are from general post. The last detection we made in general post office. We got a stuff from Italy. Thing is, it's a simple thing. If I want to transport 5 tablets, I can use my pocket, my purse. It's a simple thing. Stamps are very small thing.
Sure.
Very easily they can transport. That's one issue. Other issue is with the social. They are using the social media and the darknet. Colombo, especially Western Province, coastal area, and the places like Ella, Norelia, Arugambe, Kadua, they are held in the beach parties. The last 2 days back, also there's a big party in Wadur. We lost 4 youngsters, right? In I think 2 months back, there was a case, you know, we lost two foreigners, island drug players, due to overdose. It's a big issue. Without the support of the parents and the entire society, it's very difficult to manage this, to prevent this. Always we are expecting support of the especially parent. The parents' main job is they should reduce the opportunities.
Right. So, in terms of the role of the Police Narcotics Bureau, DIG Madhavatta, do you have an organized system where you monitor nightclubs or beach parties, etc.? Is there a streamlined system that is being used?
Yeah, actually we have a good system. It's very effective. With that only we managed. With that we managed to stop 5-6 big parties last week. I'm not going to
tell
the all details, but I think we have a system.
Right. Are there any staff limitations, training limitations that you face? I mean, as the Police Narcotics Bureau.
Yes, actually, if we can, you know, always the concealed methods are very, you know, they are bringing drugs in by using their bodies, sometimes their hand luggage, sometimes by containers, so many methods.
Sure.
The technical support is very essential. Other thing is international cooperation. For the moment we have, with the support of the help of UNODC and the NDCB, we are doing that, and other thing is rehabilitation issues. When we are rehabilitate a person, again after the 3 or 4 months or 6 months, again he generally is going to the same society. I think the rehabilitation is useless. Other thing is laws. We have proposed some laws to some amendments, especially the technical support we are expecting.
Right.
So,
thank you very much.
Interrupt the flow.
Sure.
About that. I'm wondering whether we are emphasizing more on people who have already addicted. I think it's a great service police is doing. It's very important to the raiding, all these things, but I think the most important thing in a country like ours is the prevention, not let them to get into this habit of substance misuse.
Absolutely.
So that is one which is has to be really emphasized. So it's the numbers are important, but the fact is, you know, the prevention, prevention side.
Absolutely. Point well noted, Dr. Peiris. I draw my attention now to Professor Saman Abe Singha, who is the chairman of the National Dangerous Drugs Control Board. Professor, I'd like to speak to you about public awareness and preventive education. We spoke at length about the measures which we need to take in order to combat, but then what about the preventive education methodologies, as Dr. Peiris also mentioned. How important is it for the National Dangerous Drugs Control Board to work with other stakeholders engaged in this, such as the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, and multiple other stakeholders, in order to ensure that this information is disseminated to children and to parents and to teachers?
Actually, Sonali, that is the most important thing that we have to discuss through this kind of forum, and give the knowledge and what we can expect from the teachers and especially guardians and the parents. So in that sense, we have a separate unit under NDDCB. So that is we call it is preventive education and even the outreach service. So in that two services, we are giving our best to educate these vulnerable groups, so especially the youngest, and then they have to know the repercussions, so and why they are coming to this kind of practices, because mainly that is because of the ignorance. So if they know the harmfulness, and the side effects of these kind of drugs. Now the main problem is the synthetic groups.
Sure.
Because that in that way we need a regulation. So that part is a little bit lag in this country. So we are now trying to addressing that. To education is the most important thing for the prevention. So in that case we are giving a message to the school children, and also we want to educate the teachers and the parents, and what type of loops that they can find to fall into this hell.
So at present, is there a program through which the 25 districts, I mean schools, the main schools at least in the 25 districts are trained on education of this nature? Is there a program in place right now, or is it something that's in the pipeline?
Yeah, it is already with the education system. So there is a circular issued in the Ministry of Education to set up preventive units.
Right.
And
have they been set up?
Yes,
as yet?
there's already, and so now we are monitoring, and then we are getting some information from them back.
Right.
What type of society that they have set up, and what type of education, what type of training that they are going to do, and we are also doing our best to support this kind of education.
Professor, now in other countries we find support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, but in Sri Lanka we find that is something that's majorly lacking. If I am a drug addict and I want to give up, there is no support mechanism for me to talk about my problems, talk about my difficulties, to share my story. I mean, there are isolated individuals who do this, but then there are no coordinated efforts with state sponsorship, at least, with proper monitoring systems.
But we do have, but the thing is, it's not that popular at the moment.
Right.
So
then the dissemination of that information needs to go to the public as well.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for your thoughts, Professor Samanabe Singha. Shanaka Jayasekara from the UNODC for South Asia. He's the program coordinator. Shanaka, when working to support the government in developing regional initiatives with regard to combating drug abuse, who are the other stakeholders that you work in an alliance with in Sri Lanka itself?
In Sri Lanka, we work with the Police Narcotics Bureau and the Coast Guard and the Navy.
Right.
But I also need to commend some of the initiatives taken by the government.
Right.
Back in October of 2016, when the former Minister for Law and Order, Sagala Ratnayaka, under his stewardship, initiated what is known as the Southern Route Partnership. So we have a grouping of 18 countries that come together at the level of heads of drug enforcement agencies, and this was established through the Colombo Declaration signed on the 29th of October 2016 at the BMICH. So it was spearheaded by the government of Sri Lanka, and now it is the primary mechanism to target drug trafficking in the Indian Ocean. That's moving forward quite effectively. Another initiative taken by the Presidential Secretariat under the leadership of the President, and in particular Dr. Samantha Kittalawarachi and the former Secretary of the Ministry of Law and Order, Jagat Vijayveera, was the establishment of the SARIC Center, or the South Asia Regional Intelligence Coordination Center, which the Professor spoke earlier about. This is still in its infancy, and the MOU is being sent around the countries, the South Asian countries, for them to get on board. But when that is fully functional, you'll have liaison officers from police agencies from the region sitting in Colombo and sharing intelligence, coordinating joint investigations, not only on drug trafficking but all forms of transnational crime.
Right.
And Of course, something that also needs some level of acknowledgement is the work done by the Sri Lanka Navy. The Sri Lanka Navy, through its SBS training school in Trincomalee, conducts training for regional counterparts on what is known as VBSS, Vessel Boarding Search and Seizure. It's a very specialized skill, and Sri Lanka is a center from where much of the regional training takes place through the coordination of UNODC. So Sri Lanka is punching way above its weight level in this fight against drugs in the regional level, while people like Sajiva is doing a great job in the domestic level. There are significant initiatives that the government of Sri Lanka is spearheading at a regional level and seeing success in.
Right, thank you very much. Shanaka, very quickly, in terms of policy and in terms of the fact that when it comes to psychosocial care, we are just lagging behind so much. How do you think we need to go about rectifying this, and how do you think we need to go about training psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, basically people to help those who are victimized by this?
As I mentioned earlier, at a domestic level, you need to target this on two fronts: supply side reduction and demand side reduction. So while we are contributing through the regional mechanisms for the supply side reduction, there also needs to be an emphasis played on demand side reduction, and that's exactly what these two gentlemen were saying.
Sure.
That there has to be more awareness creation, prevention, and at the school level. In many countries internationally, you find that this is being done through the school system, through the educational system. And that's the point at which you need to target the children to prevent them from experimenting or from migrating into milder forms of addiction that then convert or move over to more stronger versions. So I think focus on the education system and prevention at that level is important.
Right, thank you very much. DIG Ajit Rohana, attorney at law, my next question is to you. When we take filing of action against perpetrators of drug-related offences, it is quite a common sight in every single magistrate's court that we go to, that people are caught for minor drug offences. So do you think that the Sri Lankan legal system is being unfair by minor drug offenders, by sort of casting them aside from society, as opposed to the major drug lords and the real masterminds behind bringing drugs into Sri Lanka? Sometimes we have these drug kingpins who use these innocents as they are to perpetrate these crimes. So there is most often than not a disconnect between these two groups in society. What I'd like to ask you is, do you see this disconnect? How do you, as someone from the Sri Lanka police, look at this?
Actually, I don't think that these minor drug dealers are discriminated by the court or the Sri Lankan law. But as my friend Sajiva mentioned, that and the questions raised by, I think, Charita or Najib, we have arrested, big drug kingpins, in the recent past. Especially, I think, 12 persons had been arrested. They are in the main network. we have brought 2 persons from Pakistan in year 2015, and now their cases are pending in courts. So however, as you mentioned, so there are 2 types of cases. So according to the schedule in the Dangerous Drugs Ordinance, I mean as amended in 1984, so if that particular person is having I mean that particular amount, 2 grams or above heroin and 3 grams cocaine, like that, so generally the cases are filed in the High Court and indictments are filed by Honorable Attorney General. So it takes time. Initially the government analyst should send a report to the Police Narcotic Bureau or the arresting agency, and after that we need to send our extracts and all these I mean dossier to the Attorney General's department. But as you said, some drug addicts, so they are arrested with a packet of heroin. But in the meantime, there are big people, so there are small people like I mean consumers, but there is a middle gang. I mean what do you call, sometimes they sell 100 to 200 packets per day. So in terms of the section 54 of the enactment, so if they sell or some sort of according to that act, it says selling,
trafficking, import or export, or
selling,
manufacturing.
Yes, manufacturing. So it is an offence. So sometimes even 5 packets, so that person is distributing the things. So therefore they should be treated in a different way. I mean, if he is not like not like a drug user, but selling sometimes small amount, 50 packets, 25 packets. So therefore they should be dealt with the law, and we use section 54 of the ordinance. But however, I mean as earlier mentioned, so we need to have a very good coordination among all the stakeholders. I mean we have been given powers by the legal enactment, we have been empowered by the law, but in addition to that the excise department, so they have been empowered by the law, Sri Lanka Police, Sri Lanka Custom, Immigration, Sri Lanka Navy, Coast Guard, excise department. So every time we need to work together. There should be a very good coordination among these institutions. So otherwise we are not able to eradicate or minimize the drug problem in the country. So my opinion is the existing laws are, I mean, fairly okay, but we need to have a very good coordination among all stakeholders.
Right. Charita?
DIG Rohana, my question to you is, do you have any evidence to show that drug traffickers are linked to other crimes? Now, for example, we know during the war, LTT ran they were involved in a major drug network.
Yes.
And that money was, infused to the, to support their cause here, the war. So similar things are happening in the region with regard to terrorist movements. If you look at the domestic situation right now, what is the situation with drug traffickers and other crimes? What is the link?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Actually, I mean, generally according to our classification of crimes, so there are crimes called minor crime and grave crimes. So murders, armed robberies, rape cases, ransom cases, so those are called grave crimes. There are 24 grave crimes according to our police regulations. So 30% of the crimes, I mean major crimes that happen in the country, we can say these drug traffickers, drug addicts, drug dealers, they are involved in crimes. Especially if we take house breakings, regularly 15 to 20 house breakings reported, grave crimes reported. 90% of the perpetrators are drug addict persons. But sometimes in the recent past, some murders happen, gang robberies happen in the country. But when we conduct investigations, those investigations have revealed that drug traffickers, drug dealers, the perpetrators in respect of drug trafficking, they are involved in those crimes. So there are evidence, and that is the biggest challenge that we are facing, because it's a transnational crime as well as a domestic crime. Because now you know, some people, they are not in Sri Lanka, they are in the Middle East, or sometimes they are in European countries, but they operate the local perpetrators here in Sri Lanka. The biggest challenge is, we have a legal challenge and as well as a structural challenge, because these offences are involved in multiple jurisdictions. Now, according to our legal system, so our court can issue warrants or the search warrants or orders in respect of the persons who commit crimes in our within our country or within territorial waters, or sometimes EEZ zone. And apart from that, there are offences that he can commit in the UK or Italy or Middle East, it doesn't matter. But the problem is bringing that people into Sri Lanka, because Mutual Legal Assistance Act is there, but we don't have treaty agreements with many countries. So therefore, we know that particular suspect is their famous suspect. His name, I don't like to mention his name, but he's in one of the Middle East countries. Now I think he has gone somewhere. But it was said that, it was mentioned that he operates some people, local teams, and they commit crimes in Sri Lanka. Directly, those crimes are connected to drug dealing. But the problem is, our court is not able to, our court can issue a warrant, and thereafter if it is a warrant, we can obtain a red notice, but some countries, they are reluctant to give those suspects to us. So that is the biggest problem.
Professor Abhay Singh, there was a lot of talk also regarding the connection between drug rackets and politics. I remember some time ago the National Dangerous Drugs Control Board came out and voiced its concern that nominations were being given to people with links to the drug trade. Is that still a problem? Does the Dangerous Drug Control Board still look into those issues as well?
Well, at the moment there is no such cases. So we are free from any kind of political influence. So I am working freely, and my direct board and all independent. So now we are having a very good collaboration with all stakeholders. So without any kind of
the Dangerous Drugs Control Board reports to the Ministry of Law and Order.
Yeah, yeah. It is.
What is the budget of the NDDBC?
Well, it is the annual. It is about 100 million or.
100 million is the annual budget.
But I cannot tell exactly because I came recently, and now it is in the middle of the budget, and we get the time to time.
Do you ever find yourself short of funding or resources to carry out like the work that you need? Like you mentioned, for example, the that you don't have the capacity for rehabilitation.
Yeah.
So how does the budgeting, when you make requests for funding, does that go through the Ministry of Law and Order, or do you go directly to the Treasury?
So it is through our ministry. So our line ministry is the Minister of Law and Order. So actually recently the minister came and he visited and he inspected all the institute, and he proposed the restructuring. So and we want to have a new building with the new facilities, because we have a national narcotic laboratory there. So and we give a good training for the enforcement authority and the detection, and we want to have new techniques. So we have enough budget so far, so but it is not enough for the future trend. So we want to expand that for more sophisticated equipment and more sophisticated other techniques.
Mrs. Jayasekara, I'm going to put you on the spotlight right now. So you just heard from the chairman of the Dangerous Drugs Control Board regarding their resources and facilities. What is UNODC's assessment of the financing, resources, independence and strength of the Dangerous Drugs Control Board in Sri Lanka?
I think the NDDCB has a regulatory role. So we need to understand the different roles they play. The PNB is a primary drug enforcement agency, and NDDCB is the regulatory and policy making body. And I think they've done some really good work in terms of developing policy and collating statistics. I think there is definitely more work to be done in terms of rehabilitation work. There isn't enough slots or places, and more resources needs to be diverted towards that. But in terms of both the supply side and the demand reduction side, I think the two agencies are doing some really good work, but can be improved.
So Jayasekara, I was listening to your lecture at the BCIS, and at one point you cautioned the government or authorities rather, that if we don't check this situation right now, that we could become like a country, the situation in Kenya, like Mombasa, what drug dealers were able to achieve in those countries. Can you enlighten the viewers a bit as to the repercussions if we don't focus on the regional aspect of this situation? What could be the repercussions for Sri Lanka?
Yeah, Charita, during the lecture what I was saying was that the profit margins on drug trafficking are so large that transit locations can become consumer locations, but over a period of time it can also get into politics, into the fabric of politics, and they can become narco states, and that's where you cross that border in narcotics. Traffickers move into politics, and we've seen this happening in the East African coast, and I pointed to certain examples. I think that's a very dire situation. I don't think Sri Lanka has come to that point, and it's important that Sri Lanka arrests this issue early, before drug money gets into politics, where then policies, enforcement, everything becomes compromised because of the drug funding. I must say and reiterate the fact that Sri Lanka is not at that point. These are examples from the east coast of Africa, and these are trends that we've seen in other parts of the world, and it is important that the Sri Lankan policymakers and the politicians arrest this issue or nip it in the bud early.
You also said that in enforcing the death penalty will not help in this situation because it might cut off all the foreign intelligence to Sri Lanka. Why would that be so?
Yes, I mean UNODC does not endorse the death penalty for drug trafficking, and our point was that intelligence is shared by countries depending on the prosecution taking place, and there are many countries in the world, over 150 countries, that do not have the death penalty, and they would find it very difficult to share intelligence with local agencies if their intelligence was used towards offense, towards the death penalty, towards prosecution that led to a death penalty.
How does the price
are you concerned that because the last time that you were on the show a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the death penalty as well. Are you concerned that, as Mr. Jayasekara says, that if Sri Lanka starts enforcing the death penalty, that it will have a damaging effect on intelligence sharing with countries that oppose the death penalty?
Well, actually I am a police officer, and apart from that an attorney at law. So my view is now, I mean, you know, there are I think 93 or 96 countries, they are the members of the United Nations. So 106 countries, so they have abolished the death penalty, especially the countries in the European region and some countries in South America and even Africa. And there are 59 countries, they have retained the death penalty, and there are 29 countries, they have the death penalty in their legal system, but de facto non-implementation policy is there. But there are 4 countries in the world, they execute people in public: Saudi Arabia, Iran, North Korea and Somalia. And if we think of the superpowers of the world, 3 countries out of 5, China, Russia and the United States of America, they retain the death penalty. So if we are separated or deviated from the world, so why do they retain death penalty? And especially if we think of the countries in our region like Singapore, Japan, in Asia, so they have the lowest crime rate in the world in comparison. Now there are 5 countries in the world, so they have the lowest crime rate. Number 1, Denmark. Number 2, Iceland. Number 3, Switzerland. Number 4, Singapore. Number 5, Japan. So in our region, according to our weather condition, crime pattern, the modus operandi of the crime, how the Singapore and Japan, they have, I mean, keeping or retaining the lowest crime rate because of imposing death penalty. It has been revealed by certain recent researchers.
If you look at our neighborhood, South Asia, you have Sri Lanka, Bhutan and Bangladesh have the lowest crime rates from among the 8 SAARC countries. Those are the 3 countries that don't have the death penalty. All the others, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Maldives and Nepal. Nepal has a moratorium, I think, but they have their death penalty, and they have higher crime rates than the 3 countries, Bangladesh, Bhutan and Sri Lanka, which have seized or don't have the death penalty. So that's our neighborhood right here in South Asia.
No, but the thing is actually the India, they have retained the death penalty, but because of that, they are having that type of, it is I mean, in comparison it is high, but however, if they remove the death penalty or abolish it, sometimes the crime rate is going up. Now you see, I would like to tell you some statistics. Russia, their Japan population is 127 million. So they had only 362 murder cases along with the cases connected to drugs. Singapore in year 2017, 18 murder cases in connected to drugs. So, but if you think of the other countries in the world, the murder rate is very high, very high. But India, you know, it's a multicultural, multiracial society. The population is very high, but they retain the death penalty, but crime rate is slightly high. However, they are maintaining that rate because of they retain the death penalty.
Mr. Jayasekara, I would like to ask you, how do you track a particular stock coming from, say, off the Macron coast? Is there a particular way to detect, okay, this stock came from its origin? How do drug dealers work around that?
In terms of heroin, there are what are called heroin stamps. So each manufacturer has a unique stamp that is placed on the heroin packaging that reflects the volume as well as the purity of the content. So those stamps are the basis on which transactions are done and heroin is trafficked.
So how does the pricing work? I mean, say a shipment coming from Afghanistan, by the time it reaches South Asia or say Sri Lankan waters, what is the impact on pricing? How does it work?
Progressing from the farm gate, the prices tend to increase significantly as it's transported to the coastline and then across the coast to its transit locations and then to its final consumer locations.
Can you give us an example?
I mean, in terms of value, a kilo of pure heroin at about purity of around 75% purity is purchased at around $2,500 a kilo. When that moves to the Macron coast, it moves up to about $4,000 a kilo. When it gets to the East African coast, it could be in the range of about $12,000 a kilo. And when it moves to Europe, it's in excess of $25,000. So your move, as the transit progresses, the value of the commodity also increases significantly. But what you also have to understand is that that is at about 75% pure. What you get on the street is diluted, it's adulterated down to 8% or 15%. So there is a cutting process that takes place throughout the transit process as well. So the margins on this are significant, and that's what fuels the corruption through the entire network.
Thank you very much, Shanaka. With that, we're going for our final break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. You are on the final round. We're discussing the challenges faced in combating drug abuse with a view to ensuring effective prevention and rehabilitation strategies. My final question to Shanaka Jayasekara, Program Coordinator, UNODC for South Asia. Shanaka, Sri Lanka is an important hub for international drug trafficking, including opium, heroin, mainly because of Sri Lanka's strategic location on important maritime and aviation shipping routes. In your opinion, do you think that domestically the government of Sri Lanka needs to allocate more money to rehabilitation of drug users and reintegration programs for the victims of drugs, or do you think this is only one of the many things that the government needs to do? Predominantly, what needs to be done?
Definitely, I think there is a need for further infusion of financial resources to support the work that is being done in terms of demand reduction. However, equally important is to support the enforcement agencies, provide them with the necessary equipment and the technical skills to break the networks. What is important is to understand that low crime rate is not dependent on one particular factor. It's good policing, it's the use of technology, it's the low corruption rates in some of these countries that have low crime rates that contribute. So it's not one particular factor that is contributing to low crime rates. So it's a multiplicity of factors, and it is important that we strengthen all those factors and focus our attention both on the demand side, demand reduction side, and also the supply reduction side.
Right, thank you very much. Professor Saman Abesinghe, Chairman of the National Dangerous Drugs Control Board. As the head of the central government agency with regard to controlling the drug problem in Sri Lanka, you have a vast purview and wide-ranging powers, including formulating and reviewing a national drug policy, coordinating the activities of relevant agencies, crafting treatment, rehabilitation and education programs, conducting studies, coordinating with regional and international organizations involved in drug control activities. Do you have a timeline for implementing new programs, ensuring effective implementation and follow-ups and monitoring? If so, talk to us about it.
Yes, as an apex body and this country regarding the drugs, and so we have a very good future work, so planned work in the coming months, and particularly we are emphasizing the rehabilitation process. So that is the main task in the near future. So we want to expand our resources and our team, and then the more and more people to come in for the rehabilitation work. So that is the number one. And also we also want to train the people. So because the narcotics and these drugs, synthetic drugs, and now they are coming in, and so in that case we are developing a detection system and also training the people, those who are working with the drugs and drug detection, especially the enforcement authority. And also we want to give some kind of education for the parents and the students and youngers for these repercussions and other all side effects with these new coming drugs.
All right, thank you very much. DIG Ajit Rohan, attorney at law. Do you believe that in Sri Lanka, sometimes people, especially in villages, the masses, are scared of the police? There is no proper relationship between the villager and the police, whereas the policeman is meant to be the watchdog of the villagers. Do you think that there is an issue there, there's a disconnect there? If so, what do you think needs to be done?
Yes, actually sometimes, as you mentioned, there are issues like that. But I mean, we are implementing community policing system in the country, so every time we show that police are not an enemy. Every time police is a friend of the citizens of this country. So, but in our organization, sometimes I mean, very few corrupted officers practicing corruption, or sometimes inactive officers. So every time I mean, we punish them and we remove them from the service. We need to create a better police service.
Sure. No, I'm also talking about sensitivity, gender sensitization programs for police officers, things like that. Don't you think that there is that is an area which needs improvement?
Yes, also that area should also be I mean, improved. But in addition to that, I mean, now if we think of this drug problem, so all the stakeholders in the system, so they have a liability and responsibility. On the one hand, being the main law enforcement agency in the country, so we have a role. We need to detect persons, arrest persons, and the other institutions in the criminal justice system like judiciary, the Attorney General Department, the government analysts, so they all have a very big role, and we need to file cases as early as possible. And on the other hand, as the National Dangerous Drug Control Board, so they have a role, and especially the parents, the teachers, principals, the religious leaders, and the heads of higher education institutions, so they also have a role.
Sure.
So otherwise the police itself, alone, we are not able to curtail or reduce this drug problem. So this is everybody's responsibility. So if you think of the countries, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, now no one is able to curtail this problem. Now it has been spread, and if a minister is going to table a legislation in the parliament, so on the following day, so definitely he is killed by the drug traffickers. So they have helicopters, they have ships, so they have aircrafts also. So now still we have time to address this problem, but everyone should support.
Absolutely.
And,
Thank you.
coordination is required.
Thank you very much. DIG Sajeeva Medavatta from the Sri Lanka Police Narcotics Bureau. In conclusion, DIG Medavatta, how should you be supported in your role by the various other stakeholders? If you are to ask for assistance and collaboration from other stakeholders, what would that assistance be?
As Ajit mentioned, this should be a common effort. All the stakeholders should support this. This is a bigger social cancer and the bigger social problem. Last 2 years, we detected, I think, more than 300 kilos of heroin with the support of with the help of the public. I should mention them in the special interview. They gave us information, and sometimes we are doing joint operations with the Navy, with the Customs, and especially STF. Last year we established a new range for combating narcotics and organized crime. Division, the range, it's a new range. We are working together. All this we are helping. We are seeking assistance from the private and government, other stakeholders. There is a proposal, as as Professor Abesiki mentioned. There is a proposal from the Education Ministry. I think we can work together to educate especially the students, teachers, and the public. If you want to give any information or share any information for us, I can give our contact numbers. You can see in the screen. Especially Inspector General of Police, Mr. Pujit Jayasundara, he also gave his 2 mobile numbers. My mobile number also there. And the STF, we operate in 24 hours. So that number, if you can call anytime. And the NDCB number is, emergency number is 1984. If you want any details, any information, or if you share information with us, you can call us. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity.
Thank you, DIG Medavatta. Finally, Dr. Upali Piris, consultant psychiatrist. Doctor, we are concluding the program with your final remarks. The message that drugs are not cool needs to be disseminated among children, not only in the villages, not only in the cities, but across the country in all 3 languages. Also, the relationship between children and parents needs to now be reinforced. It needs to be strengthened, because there are a lot of families that go through social issues across Sri Lanka. How do we bridge this gap, and how do we get this message to the masses?
Sonali, thank you. Thank you for letting me to conclude this session. And it highlights that your understanding of the importance of prevention, which I have been reiterating from the beginning, because it's important to nip in the bud this problem, rather than going and trying to arrest or hang them or whatever, the people who have committed the crime. You summarized actually the importance of detecting this at the earliest stage in your introduction just now. As a clinician, as I told you, it's very important the getting the message across by a variety of means, that children and the students at the younger age, tender age, because such values are inculcated easily. Because if you look at that, even for other belief systems in Sri Lanka, this is the case. One of the points I want to reiterate that we should not do is that, say, if you get a whole of heroin, not to put any value for that. By putting that, we are marketing that, and never. It's okay to report that you have caught this much, but when you say it will be worth millions and billions, and that really probably the person who get attracted, or drug traffickers or the drug pushers, it would be a very good idea for them. So that kind of tactics, we should really avoid that. I think that's one of the messages I want to reiterate at the conclusion.
Right. Thank you very much, Doctor. With that, we draw to a close this edition of Face the Nation. Fantastic panel of guests tonight. Thank you very much, DIG Ajit Rohana, Sri Lanka Police Attorney at Law, for joining us. Thank you for your perspective and insights. Also, big thank you to DIG Sajiva Madhavatta from the Police Narcotics Bureau. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Special thank you to Dr. Upali Piris, Head of Psychiatry at the Department, Faculty of Medicine, University of Kelaniya, and also consultant psychiatrist. Our fourth guest, Professor Samanabe Singha, Chairman of the National Dangerous Drugs Control Board, heading the apex body that is in charge of controlling the drug menace in Sri Lanka. Finally, Shanaka Jayasekara, Program Coordinator, UNODC for South Asia. Thank you, Shanaka, for your time, for your perspectives. Thank you also to Charitha and Nadeem for asking the right questions. With that, we draw to a close this program. Thank you for your time. Good night.